The warm Colorado sun beat down on Caleb Mitchell's back as he urged his horse over the rolling hills, dust trailing behind him like a loyal shadow. The year was 1878, and at 32 years old, he had seen enough of life to know that unexpected sights on the frontier usually meant trouble. But what caught his eye that afternoon wasn't a band of outlaws or a wounded animal. It was a woman kneeling in the dirt near the banks of Eagle Creek, tracing what appeared to be words with a small stick. Caleb slowed his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Thunder, and approached cautiously. The woman didn't seem to notice him, so absorbed was she in her task. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose braid, wisps escaping to frame her face. She wore a simple blue dress, the hem dusty from the dry earth. "Madam," Caleb called, tipping his worn leather hat, "everything all right?" The woman startled, dropping her stick and quickly wiping away a tear with the back of her hand. She looked up at him with eyes the color of autumn leaves a rich amber brown that caught Caleb off guard with their intensity. "I'm fine, thank you," she said, her voice soft but steady. She made no move to stand. Caleb dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. "Pardon my intrusion, just wanted to make sure you weren't in any trouble, not many folks out this way." The woman looked back down at the names she had scratched into the earth. Caleb could make out several Elizabeth, Thomas, Sarah, William. "They're the ones I miss most," she said simply, answering the question he hadn't asked. Something in her voice made Caleb's heart twist. He'd heard that tone before in his own voice after the war, in the voices of those who'd lost too much too quickly. "I'm Caleb Mitchell," he said, offering his name instead of sympathy, which he suspected she'd had enough of. "Beatrice Morgan," she replied, finally rising to her feet and brushing the dust from her skirt. "But everyone calls me Bea." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Morgan. You far from home?" Bea looked around at the open landscape, the distant mountains to the west and the vast prairie stretching east. "I'm not sure I have one anymore." The wind picked up, erasing some of the names she had written. She watched them disappear without emotion, as if she'd expected nothing less. "I have a small ranch about 3 miles that way," Caleb said, pointing north. "My sister keeps house for me. If you need a place to rest or a hot meal, you're welcome to join us." Bea studied him, weighing his offer. Caleb knew what she saw: a weather-beaten cowboy with sun-creased eyes, 3 days' worth of stubble and clothes that had seen better days. But he hoped she also saw honesty. "That's kind of you, Mr. Mitchell, but I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition. Hannah, that's my sister. She always cooks for an army anyway." He paused. "And it looks like rain coming in from the north. Wouldn't want you caught in it." As if on cue, thunder rumbled in the distance. Bea glanced at the darkening sky, then back at the names in the dirt. With a small nod, she seemed to make up her mind. "Thank you, I'd be grateful for your hospitality." Caleb helped her onto Thunder, then mounted behind her. He couldn't help but notice the slight stiffness in her posture, the careful way she held herself apart from him despite their proximity. Whoever Beatrice Morgan was, whatever had happened to her, she carried a weight that made her seem both fragile and formidable at once. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady rhythm of Thunder's hooves and the increasingly insistent rumble of thunder. Finally, Caleb spoke. "Those names." "Family." Bea was quiet for so long that Caleb thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice was barely audible over the wind. "My family, my friends, my town." "Your town," Willow Creek. "There was an outbreak of diphtheria this spring. I was away visiting my aunt in Denver when it happened. By the time I returned," her voice trailed off. "I buried those I could. Some had already been put in the ground." Caleb's arms tightened instinctively around the reins. "I'm sorry." "Everyone is," Bea said, and there was no bitterness in her voice, only a bottomless fatigue. "But being sorry doesn't bring them back." The first large raindrops began to fall as they crested a hill and Caleb's modest ranch came into view. It wasn't much: a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, a barn, a corral with a few horses, and some fenced pasture where his small herd of cattle grazed. But it was home, hard-won after years of saving and working other men's lands. They made it to the barn just as the sky opened up. Caleb helped Bea down from Thunder and quickly led the horse into a stall. "Let's get inside before we're both soaked through," he said, gesturing toward the cabin where a warm light glowed in the windows. Hannah met them at the door, her round face a picture of surprise. At 28, she was Caleb's only living relative, a widow who had come to live with him after her husband died in a mining accident 3 years earlier. "Well, who do we have here?" she asked, already reaching for towels to dry them. "Hannah, this is Miss Beatrice Morgan." "Miss Morgan, my sister, Hannah Mitchell." Hannah's hospitable nature immediately took over. "Goodness, you're drenched. Come in, come in. I've got stew on and plenty of it. You'll stay for supper, of course, and with this storm, you'll stay the night as well." Before Bea could protest, Hannah had ushered her to the fire, pressed a cup of hot coffee into her hands, and disappeared into the bedroom, returning with a dry dress. "It might be a bit large, I'm more generously proportioned than you, but it's clean and warm." Bea accepted the clothing with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Just Hannah, please, and it's no trouble at all. It's nice to have another woman around, even if just for an evening." While Bea changed in the bedroom, Caleb filled Hannah in on their meeting, keeping his voice low. "The entire town," Hannah whispered, horror-struck. "Oh, the poor dear, no wonder she looks so lost. She was writing their names in the dirt when I found her, said they were the ones she missed most." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "Well, she'll have a good meal and a safe place to sleep tonight at least. It's not much, but it's something." When Bea returned, dressed in Hannah's blue calico, her damp hair combed and rebraided, they sat down to a simple but hearty meal of venison stew, cornbread, and early summer greens from Hannah's kitchen garden. The conversation stayed on neutral topics: the weather, the condition of the roads, Hannah's success with her vegetables despite the dry spring. After dinner, as Hannah cleared the dishes, Bea insisted on helping. The two women worked side by side at the wash basin while Caleb stoked the fire against the increasingly wild night outside. "How long have you been traveling?" Hannah asked gently. "Almost a month now," Bea replied, drying a plate with careful attention. "I stayed in Willow Creek as long as I could, but—" She set the plate down. "There was nothing left for me there." "And where are you headed?" Bea's hands stilled. "I don't know. I thought I might find work in one of the larger towns. I was a schoolteacher in Willow Creek." "A schoolteacher?" Hannah exclaimed. "Well, isn't that fortunate? The families around here have been talking about starting a proper school. Right now, the children get sporadic lessons from Pastor Emerson's wife when she has time, which isn't often with 6 children of her own." Bea's expression showed a flicker of interest for the first time. "There are enough children for a school, between the ranches and the town, certainly. Pine Ridge isn't large, but it's growing. It's about 5 miles east of here." Caleb watched Bea's face, noting how her features softened at the mention of children and teaching. It transformed her, hinting at who she might have been before tragedy struck. The storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling down the chimney. Hannah made up a bed for Bea on a small trundle in her room, and soon the cabin was quiet except for the storm's fury outside. Caleb lay awake in his narrow bed, listening to the rain and thinking about the woman sleeping under his roof. He had seen grief before, had carried his own share after the war and after his parents died, but there was something about Beatrice Morgan's quiet dignity that moved him. She didn't wail or rage. She simply wrote names in the dirt, preserving memories that would be washed away all too soon. Morning arrived with cleared skies and a freshly washed world. Caleb rose early, as was his habit, and found Bea already up, standing on the porch and watching the sunrise paint the distant mountains gold and pink. "You're an early riser," he commented, joining her but leaving space between them. "I haven't been sleeping well," she admitted. "But this," she gestured toward the vista before them, "this is worth being awake for." "It is," Caleb agreed. "Took me a long time to get this piece of land. Some mornings I still can't believe it's mine." "How long have you been here?" 5 years on my own. Before that, I worked as a ranch hand for the Crawfords over near Pine Ridge, started with them right after the war and saved every penny I could." "You fought in the war?" Bea turned to look at him, really look at him, perhaps for the first time. Caleb nodded. "Union Army. Enlisted in '63 when I was 17. Saw things no boy should see." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask him to. They stood in companionable silence until Hannah called them in for breakfast. Over plates of flapjacks and bacon, Hannah brought up the school again. "I'm planning to go into town today for supplies. I could mention to Pastor Emerson that we've met a qualified teacher who might be interested in discussing the possibility of a school." Bea hesitated. "I don't know if I'm staying." "No harm in discussing it," Hannah persisted gently. "And you need somewhere to stay while you decide your next steps. We have plenty of room here, don't we, Caleb?" Caleb nearly choked on his coffee. "Of course," he managed. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need, Miss Morgan. Please call me Bea," she said. "And thank you, but I couldn't impose further." "It's not an imposition," Hannah insisted. "I'd welcome the company, and it would give you time to rest and consider your options." Bea looked between the siblings, clearly torn. "You're very kind, both of you, perhaps." "Perhaps for a few days, if you're certain." "Excellent," Hannah beamed. "I'll head to town after breakfast, and you can rest today. Tomorrow we can ride in together, and you can meet some of the families." After Hannah left for town, an awkward silence fell between Caleb and Bea. He had work to do, fences to mend, cattle to check, but he felt oddly reluctant to leave her alone. "Would you like to see the ranch?" he offered impulsively. Something like relief crossed Bea's face. "Yes, I'd like that very much." They walked together, Caleb pointing out the various buildings and features of his modest spread. The barn, where he kept Thunder and 3 other horses. The corral, where he broke the occasional wild Mustang for extra income. The small apple orchard that Hannah had insisted on planting, claiming that a home needed growing things to truly be a home. "It's lovely," Bea said sincerely as they paused by the orchard. "You've built something real here. It's not much compared to some of the big outfits, but it's mine. No debts, no one to answer to but myself and the weather." He smiled slightly. "And Hannah, of course. You're fortunate to still have family," Bea said, her gaze drifting to the distant hills. "I know it," Caleb agreed softly. "Lost our parents to influenza when Hannah was just 16. It was hard on her, harder than on me since I was already out on my own by then." Bea nodded, understanding in her eyes. "My parents died when I was young. I was raised by my grandmother in Willow Creek, and she was—" Caleb didn't finish the sentence. "One of the first to go," Bea confirmed, her voice steady despite the pain it must have cost her. "She was 73 and still the strongest woman I knew." They continued walking, eventually reaching a small stream that cut through Caleb's property. "This feeds into Eagle Creek," he explained. "Never runs dry, even in the worst droughts. That's why this land was worth saving for." Bea knelt by the water, trailing her fingers through the clear current. Without warning, she began tracing letters in the soft mud of the bank. "Elizabeth," Caleb knelt beside her. "Your grandmother." Bea nodded, adding another name, "Thomas, my cousin. He was only 12. Her finger moved again. "Sarah. My best friend since childhood, William. Sarah's husband. They had only been married a year." Name after name appeared in the mud, a roll call of the dead. Caleb remained silent, bearing witness to her grief. When she finally stopped, 17 names stood out starkly against the dark earth. "I keep thinking I'll forget them," Bea said, her voice barely audible over the gurgle of the stream. "If I don't write them down, they'll fade away as if they never existed." "You won't forget," Caleb said with quiet certainty. "Some memories are carved too deep to lose." Bea looked at him then, really looked at him, and Caleb had the uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing straight through to his soul. "Yes," she said simply. "I suppose they are." They returned to the cabin in time for lunch, a simple affair of bread, cheese, and cold ham. Afterward, Caleb excused himself to tend to the cattle, and Bea insisted on tackling the mending that Hannah had left out. The domestic task seemed to soothe her, and when Caleb returned hours later, he found her humming softly as she darned a sock with neat, even stitches. Hannah arrived back from town laden with supplies and news. "The whole town is buzzing about the possibility of a school," she announced as she bustled through the door. "Pastor Emerson wants to meet you as soon as possible, Bea and Mrs. Crawford. She's the closest thing Pine Ridge has to society, is insisting on hosting a small gathering on Saturday so you can meet all the families with school-aged children." Bea looked overwhelmed. "This Saturday? But I haven't even decided, just a meeting," Hannah assured her. no commitments. But it would be a shame not to at least explore the possibility, wouldn't it? Put that way, Bea could hardly disagree. Yes, I suppose it would. Wonderful. Hannah unpacked her purchases, chattering all the while about the people Bea would meet, the possible location for a schoolhouse, and how fortunate it was that Caleb had found her by Eagle Creek. Providence, Hannah declared. That's what Pastor Emerson called it when I told him, and I'm inclined to agree. Caleb caught Bea's eye across the room and gave her a small, apologetic smile for his sister's enthusiasm. To his surprise, Bea smiled back, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her face. Something shifted in Caleb's chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in a very long time. That night, after a hearty supper and more talk of the school, Caleb stepped outside for a breath of air. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds. He heard the door open behind him and knew without turning that it was Bea. "Your sister is a force of nature," she said, coming to stand beside him. Caleb chuckled. "That she is, always has been, but her heart's in the right place." "I know," Bea gazed up at the stars. "I'm grateful to both of you. I was adrift when you found me. And now I'm still adrift, but at least I've found a temporary harbor." The next few days fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Caleb tended to the ranch while Hannah showed Bea around the property and helped her prepare for the meeting with the townspeople. Bea insisted on contributing to the household by cooking and cleaning alongside Hannah. And in the evenings, the three of them sat by the fire, talking or reading from Hannah's small collection of books. Caleb found himself watching Bea when she wasn't looking, the graceful movement of her hands as she worked, the way the firelight caught in her dark hair, the rare but increasingly frequent smile that transformed her solemn features. He told himself it was natural concern for someone who had suffered such loss, but in his heart, he knew it was more. Saturday arrived clear and mild. Hannah had spent the previous day baking for the gathering, and the cabin smelled of cinnamon and sugar. Bea emerged from the bedroom wearing her own blue dress, now cleaned and mended, her hair arranged in a neat coronet of braids. "Will I do?" she asked Hannah anxiously. "You look lovely," Hannah assured her. "Very proper and teacherly." Caleb, coming in from the barn, stopped short at the sight of her. "You look beautiful," he said before he could think better of it. A blush colored Bea's cheeks. "Thank you," she murmured, smoothing her skirt. They traveled to Pine Ridge in Caleb's wagon, Hannah chattering excitedly the whole way. The town itself was small but growing, a main street with a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, a church, and about 24 houses scattered around the perimeter. The Crawford home, the largest in town, stood on a slight rise at the north end of the street. Mrs. Eliza Crawford met them at the door, a tall, elegant woman with steel gray hair and an assessing gaze. "Miss Morgan, how delightful to meet you. Hannah has told us so much about you." "Thank you for hosting this gathering, Mrs. Crawford," Bea replied with perfect composure, though Caleb noticed her hands trembling slightly. "Not at all, my dear. Education is essential for our growing community. Come in, come in. Everyone is so eager to meet you." The Crawfords' parlor was filled with the prominent families of Pine Ridge, the Emersons, the Fosters, the Wilsons, the Hendersons, and several others. Caleb hung back as Bea was introduced around, watching as she gradually relaxed and began to engage with the parents about their children and their hopes for a school. "She's a natural," Mr. Crawford commented, coming to stand beside Caleb. Jacob Crawford had been Caleb's employer for 5 years, and though they had occasionally butted heads, there was mutual respect between them. "Yes, she is," Caleb agreed, unable to keep the pride from his voice. Crawford gave him a shrewd look. "Known her long, have you?" "Less than a week," Caleb admitted. Crawford's bushy eyebrows rose. "Interesting." Before Caleb could ask what he meant, Pastor Emerson called for everyone's attention. A tall, thin man with kind eyes, he had been instrumental in the growth of Pine Ridge, both spiritually and practically. "Friends, neighbors, I believe we can all agree that Miss Morgan is exactly the answer to our prayers for a proper teacher." There were murmurs of agreement around the room. "The question now is where to house the school until we can build a proper schoolhouse." Several options were discussed: the church on weekdays, the back room of the general store, even the seldom used upstairs of the saloon, quickly dismissed by the more conservative elements present. Finally, Mrs. Crawford spoke up. "What about the old Henderson place?" "It's been sitting empty since old Mr. Henderson passed last winter, and it's sturdy enough with a little work." All eyes turned to John Henderson, the deceased man's nephew and heir. "I've been meaning to do something with it," he admitted. "It's small, but it has one large room that could serve well enough. If the town wants to fix it up for a school, I'm agreeable." Plans were quickly made. The men would gather the following Saturday to begin repairs on the Henderson cabin. The women would organize desks, books, and supplies. And Bee would prepare to welcome students by the 1st of July, giving her 3 weeks to settle in and prepare. "Where will Miss Morgan stay in town?" Mrs. Wilson asked. "She can hardly commute from the Mitchell Ranch every day, especially when the weather turns." "She can stay with us, Mrs. Crawford offered smoothly. "We have plenty of room, and it would be proper for a young, unmarried teacher to reside with a family of standing in the community." Caleb felt an unexpected pang at the thought of Bee leaving the ranch. He glanced at her and saw a similar hesitation in her eyes. "That's very kind, Mrs. Crawford," Bee said carefully, "but I wouldn't want to inconvenience you." "Perhaps there's a room to let somewhere in town," Pastor Emerson frowned. "The only rooms for rent are above the saloon, which would hardly be appropriate. And the hotel is too expensive for a long-term arrangement." "She could continue to stay with us," Hannah suggested. "We don't mind the arrangement at all, do we, Caleb?" All eyes turned to him. "Not at all," he said, perhaps too quickly. "It's no trouble." Mrs. Crawford's lips pursed slightly. "It's a bit irregular, and the commute would be challenging, especially in winter." "We could cross that bridge when we come to it," Pastor Emerson suggested diplomatically. "For now, if the Mitchells are willing to host Miss Morgan and she's comfortable with the arrangement, it seems the most practical solution." The matter was settled, and the conversation turned to curriculum, school rules, and the number of students expected to attend. By the end of the afternoon, Bee had been officially hired as the schoolteacher of Pine Ridge, with a modest salary to be paid by contributions from the families whose children would attend. The ride back to the ranch was animated, with Hannah full of excitement about the day's events and Bee oscillating between enthusiasm for the opportunity and anxiety about her ability to meet expectations. "You'll be wonderful," Caleb assured her when Hannah paused for breath. "Those children will be lucky to have you." Bee's smile was grateful but uncertain. "I hope so. It's been a while since I felt useful." That night, after Hannah had gone to bed, Caleb found Bee still awake, sitting by the dying fire with a cup of tea, couldn't sleep. He asked, settling into the chair opposite her. She shook her head. "Too much happening too quickly, I suppose. A week ago I was wandering with no destination, and now I'm the schoolteacher of Pine Ridge, having second thoughts." "No, not exactly." Bee stared into her cup. "I'm grateful for the opportunity. It's just, starting over is harder than I expected. Everything I do, everyone I meet, it all feels like a betrayal of those I left behind." Caleb leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Living isn't a betrayal, Bee. Those people you loved, they wouldn't want you to stop living because they're gone." Tears filled her eyes. "I know that in my head. My heart is slower to understand." "Give it time," Caleb said. "And in the meantime, know that you're not alone. Hannah and we're here. The people of Pine Ridge are here. You don't have to carry it all by yourself." A tear spilled over, tracing a silver path down her cheek. "Thank you, Caleb, for everything." He wanted to reach out, to wipe away her tear, to pull her into his arms and promise that the pain would ease. Instead, he simply nodded and stood. "You should try to get some sleep. Hannah has a full day planned for you tomorrow, something about fabric for curtains for the schoolhouse." That drew a small laugh from Bee. "Your sister is remarkable." "That she is," Caleb agreed. "Good night, Bee." "Good night, Caleb." The next 3 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. True to their word, the men of Pine Ridge descended on the old Henderson cabin the following Saturday, Caleb among them. They repaired the roof, replaced broken windows, built simple desks and benches, and constructed a small platform with a desk for the teacher. The women, led by Mrs. Crawford and Hannah, sewed curtains, donated books, and gathered slates and chalk for the students. Bea threw herself into preparations, creating lesson plans for students ranging from 5 to 16 years old, many of whom had received only the most rudimentary education thus far. She visited each family with school-aged children, getting to know the parents and children personally. Through it all, she continued to stay at the Mitchell Ranch, riding into town with Caleb or Hannah when needed and contributing to the household by cooking, cleaning, and even helping with some of the lighter ranch work. The arrangement raised a few eyebrows in town, particularly from Mrs. Crawford, but Pastor Emerson's approval went a long way toward silencing potential gossip. Caleb found himself increasingly drawn to Bea. Her initial grief-stricken solemnity had given way to a quiet determination and, increasingly, moments of genuine joy. She was intelligent, compassionate, and possessed a dry wit that emerged when she was comfortable. The more he learned about her, the more he wanted to know. One evening, about a week before the school was set to open, Caleb found Bea by the stream again. This time she wasn't writing names but sitting quietly watching the water flow. "May I join you?" he asked. She nodded, shifting to make room on the large rock where she sat. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in such a short time. For the better, I hope." "Yes," she said softly. "I didn't think that would be possible, but yes." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the evening settling around them with the chirp of crickets and the call of a nighthawk overhead. "I keep expecting to wake up and find this has all been a dream," Bea admitted. "That I'm still wandering, still alone." "It's real," Caleb assured her. "You've made it real. The school, the connections you've built with the families, that's all you, Bea." She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the gold of the setting sun. "Not just me. You and Hannah gave me a chance when I was at my lowest. I don't know how to thank you for that. You don't need to thank us. Having you here has been." Caleb searched for the right word. "It's been a gift." Something shifted in Bea's expression, a softening, a vulnerability that made Caleb's heart race. For a moment he thought she might lean toward him or he toward her. Instead, she looked away, back to the stream. "We should head back," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "Hannah will be wondering where we are." The moment passed, but something had changed between them. A possibility had opened up, unspoken but undeniably present. The day before the school was set to open, Bea was a bundle of nerves. She had visited the schoolhouse that morning for a final check of preparations and returned to the ranch in a state of near panic. What if I've forgotten how to teach? What if the children don't respect me? What if the parents decide I'm not qualified after all? She paced the cabin, wringing her hands. Hannah tried to reassure her, but it was Caleb who finally broke through her anxiety. "Bea," he said firmly, catching her hands to stop her pacing. "You're ready. The children will love you because you care about them. The parents already respect you. And you haven't forgotten how to teach any more than I've forgotten how to ride." She looked up at him, her eyes wide and uncertain. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've watched you these past weeks. I've seen your patience with the Henderson boy who can barely read. I've seen your excitement when planning lessons. I've seen your kindness with the Wilson girl who's so shy she can hardly speak." His voice softened. "You're a born teacher, Bea. Those children are lucky to have you." Something in his words or his tone reached her. She took a deep breath and nodded. "You're right, I'm being foolish." "Not foolish," Caleb corrected gently. "Human." The following morning dawned clear and bright. Caleb insisted on driving Bea to the schoolhouse himself, wanting to see her safely installed before the students arrived. Hannah had helped her select her outfit the night before, a crisp white blouse and dark blue skirt that looked both professional and approachable. "You look perfect," Caleb told her as he helped her into the wagon. "Thank you," Bea said, her smile nervous but genuine. "For everything, Caleb. I don't know if I could have done this without you and Hannah." "You would have found your way," he said with certainty, "but I'm glad we could help." When they reached the schoolhouse, several families were already waiting. The children, dressed in their Sunday best for the first day, fidgeted excitedly while their parents chatted. Mrs. Crawford was there, of course, as was Pastor Emerson, ready to offer a blessing on the new school. Caleb helped Bea down from the wagon, conscious of all eyes on them. "You've got this," he murmured for her ears alone. She squeezed his hand briefly, then straightened her shoulders and approached the gathering with a warm smile. "Good morning, everyone. What a beautiful day to begin our school." Pastor Emerson stepped forward. "Shall we ask for God's blessing before the children enter their new schoolhouse?" Everyone bowed their heads as the pastor offered a simple prayer for wisdom, patience, and learning. When he finished, B stepped up to the schoolhouse door and rang the small brass bell that had been donated by Mr. Wilson from his general store. "Children, please line up to enter your new school," she called, her voice clear and confident. 15 children, ranging from little Annie Foster at 5 years old to James Henderson at 16, formed a somewhat ragged line. B led them inside, where the freshly scrubbed desks awaited them, arranged by size with the smallest at the front. The parents peered in, nodding approvingly at the orderly room with its new curtains, the American flag hanging at the front, and the large slate board where B had already written "Welcome to Pine Ridge School" in her neat hand. "We'll leave you to it, Miss Morgan," Pastor Emerson said. "Parents, let's allow the children and their teacher to get acquainted." The adults retreated, though Mrs. Crawford lingered to add, "I'll be by at noon to check on your progress, Miss Morgan." When the parents had gone, Caleb remained by his wagon, reluctant to leave. Through the open windows, he could hear Bee's clear voice as she began the day's lessons. Despite her nervousness earlier, she sounded completely in control, and the children's responses were eager and respectful. Caleb finally turned the wagon toward home, his heart full of an emotion he wasn't quite ready to name. The weeks that followed established a new routine. Bee stayed at the ranch during the week, rising early to ride into town with Caleb, who adjusted his schedule to accommodate her. She spent her days teaching, often staying late to help a struggling student or prepare for the next day. On weekends, she helped around the ranch, her city-bred hands gradually toughening as she learned to gather eggs, tend the garden, and even assist with the horses. Hannah watched the growing connection between Caleb and Bee with poorly concealed delight. "She's blooming here," she told Caleb one evening while Bee was occupied with grading assignments. "And so are you, brother." Caleb couldn't deny it. Something had awakened in him a hopefulness, a sense of possibility that had been dormant for years. But he moved cautiously, mindful of Bee's still healing heart and the expectations of the community. A schoolteacher was held to high moral standards, and he wouldn't risk her position or reputation. As summer deepened into early fall, the school flourished under Bee's guidance. Even Mrs. Crawford, initially skeptical, became one of her strongest advocates after her grandson, previously uninterested in learning, began bringing home books to read in his free time. "You've worked miracles with that boy," Mrs. Crawford told Bee after church one Sunday. "I always said he had potential, but you're the first to draw it out of him." Such praise from the town's most influential matron solidified Bee's position in the community. She was invited to social gatherings, included in planning for the Harvest Festival, and generally accepted as a permanent addition to Pine Ridge. Yet despite her integration into town life, Bee showed no inclination to move from the Mitchell Ranch. When Mrs. Crawford again offered her a room, Bee politely declined, citing the peace and quiet of the ranch as beneficial for her lesson planning. If anyone suspected other reasons for her preference, they kept such thoughts private. One crisp October evening, Caleb found Bee by the stream again. The trees along the bank had turned golden and red, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the water. She was kneeling by the bank, and as he approached, he saw that she was writing in the mud again. His heart sank, thinking she had returned to her litany of the dead. But as he drew closer, he saw that she was writing different names. James, Annie, Robert, Samuel, the names of her students. "Planning lessons?" he asked softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, unsurprised by his presence. "In a way. I was thinking about how far they've each come since July. James is reading at a level I wouldn't have thought possible. Annie has overcome her fear of numbers. Robert's handwriting is almost legible now." She smiled. "Small victories, but important ones." Caleb sat beside her on the bank. Those aren't small victories to them or their parents. You've made a real difference here, B. I hope so. She traced another name in the mud. Teaching again, it's helped me remember who I was before Willow Creek, who I still am underneath the grief. And who is that? Caleb asked. B considered the question seriously. Someone who believes in possibilities, in growth, in tomorrow being better than today. She looked at him directly. Someone who's learning to hope again. The word hung between them, fragile and powerful. Hope. It was what had brought Caleb west after the war, what had driven him to save for his own land, what had sustained him through years of hard work and solitude. Hope is a good thing to relearn, he said finally. Yes, B's fingers traced idle patterns in the mud. Caleb, I've been thinking. About the future, his heart quickened. Oh, Mrs. Crawford mentioned again that I should consider more permanent lodging in town before winter sets in. The roads can be difficult, and there might be days when travel between here and town isn't possible. She has a point, Caleb admitted reluctantly. I wouldn't want you stranded or risking your safety to get to the school. No, B took a deep breath, but I don't want to leave the ranch either. The simple admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. We don't want you to leave, Caleb said carefully. Hannah and I both, we've grown accustomed to having you here. B's eyes, so expressive, revealed her disappointment at his measured response. Accustomed, Caleb cursed himself inwardly. That's not the right word. He stopped, gathering his courage. I don't want you to leave because I care for you, B, more than I should, perhaps. The hope that bloomed in her eyes gave him confidence to continue. When I found you that day by Eagle Creek, writing names in the dirt, I had no idea how completely you would change my life. These past months, watching you heal, seeing your strength and kindness, I've fallen in love with you, Beatrice Morgan. Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. I never expected to feel this way again, she whispered. After Willow Creek, I thought that part of me had died with the others, but you and Hannah, this place, you brought me back to life. She reached for his hand. I love you too, Caleb. It terrifies me, but it's true. Caleb's heart soared. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. I know you're still healing. I don't want to rush you. We can take this as slowly as you need. B's smile was tender. Life is too precious and too uncertain for unnecessary waiting. I've learned that much. The evening air had grown cool, but neither of them noticed. They sat by the stream as darkness fell, talking of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. B spoke more freely of Willow Creek than she ever had before, not just of the tragedy, but of the joy and love she had known there. Caleb shared stories of the war, of the nightmares that still occasionally plagued him, of his journey west in search of peace. When they finally returned to the cabin, hand in hand, Hannah took one look at their faces and burst into tears of joy. It's about time, she exclaimed, embracing them both. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in the root cellar to get you to admit your feelings. They laughed, the three of them together, and Caleb felt a sense of rightness, of family, that he hadn't known since before the war. That night, as he lay in bed, he allowed himself to imagine a future with B by his side, not just as a temporary guest, but as his wife, building a life together on the land he loved. The following Sunday after church, Caleb sought out Pastor Emerson. The older man listened to his plans with a thoughtful expression. You're sure this is what you both want? He asked. Miss Morgan has been through a terrible ordeal, and such trauma can affect judgment. I'm sure of my feelings, Caleb replied firmly, and B knows her own mind. We're not rushing into this, we've discussed it thoroughly. The pastor nodded slowly. I've seen how you look at each other, and I've seen how Miss Morgan has flourished here. If you're both certain, you have my blessing. He paused. Have you spoken to Mrs. Crawford? As the school board's unofficial leader, she'll have opinions about a married teacher, Caleb grimaced. Not yet, we wanted to speak with you first. Wise, Pastor Emerson said with a small smile. Mrs. Crawford appreciates proper protocol. I suggest you both approach her together, presenting your plans as beneficial for the school's stability. Armed with this advice, Caleb and B requested a meeting with Mrs. Crawford that very afternoon. The formidable woman received them in her parlor, her expression carefully neutral as they explained their intentions. "Marriage," she repeated when they had finished. "Well, this is rather sudden, not so very sudden," Bea replied with gentle firmness. "Caleb and I have known each other for several months now, and we've given this decision careful consideration." "I see," Mrs. Crawford's shrewd eyes moved between them. "And you intend to continue teaching after the marriage?" "Yes, if the school board approves," Bea said. "Teaching is my calling, and the children need consistency. Many communities won't employ married female teachers," Mrs. Crawford pointed out. "They believe a woman's place is in the home once she weds." Caleb tensed, but Bea remained composed. "I'm aware of that tradition, Mrs. Crawford. But Pine Ridge is a progressive community, is it not? And practically speaking, finding another qualified teacher willing to come to a small frontier town would be difficult." Mrs. Crawford's lips twitched, almost a smile. "You make a compelling argument, Miss Morgan. And I must admit, the children have thrived under your instruction." She paused. "What are your living arrangements to be? The ranch is still quite a distance from town." "We've discussed that," Caleb said. "I own a small parcel of land closer to town that I've been holding as an investment. We could build a home there that would put Bea within easy walking distance of the school." This news clearly surprised Mrs. Crawford. "Well, you have thought this through, haven't you?" She considered for a moment longer, then nodded decisively. "Very well. I see no reason to object to your marriage or to Miss Morgan, Mrs. Mitchell, as she will be continuing her teaching duties. In fact, having our teacher permanently settled in the community can only be beneficial." Relief washed over both of them. Mrs. Crawford's approval virtually guaranteed the school board's acceptance of their plans. "Thank you, Mrs. Crawford," Bea said sincerely. "Your support means a great deal to us." "When do you plan to marry?" the older woman asked, already shifting to practical matters. "We were thinking December after the school's Christmas pageant," Caleb replied. "That would give us time to begin building the new house, which could be ready by spring." "A winter wedding," Mrs. Crawford mused. "Lovely. And of course, you'll be married in the church with Pastor Emerson officiating." It wasn't a question, but they both nodded agreement. "Excellent. Now, Miss Morgan, we must discuss the arrangements. A proper wedding requires planning, even a small one." By the time they left the Crawford residence, the wedding had expanded from their simple vision to include flowers from Denver, special music, and a reception in the town hall. Bea looked slightly dazed. "I think we just lost control of our own wedding," she whispered to Caleb as they walked toward the wagon. He chuckled, squeezing her hand. "Does it matter? The important part is that at the end of it we'll be married." Her smile was radiant. "Yes, that's all that really matters." News of their engagement spread quickly through Pine Ridge. Hannah was ecstatic, immediately beginning to sew a wedding quilt and planning how to rearrange the cabin to give the couple privacy until their new home was built. The townspeople offered congratulations, the women cornering Bea after school with advice and offers of help with the wedding, the men stopping by the ranch to slap Caleb on the back and tease him good-naturedly about finally getting hitched. Caleb's focus shifted to the new house. With winter approaching, he couldn't begin actual construction, but he could prepare. He visited the site, 10 acres of good land about a mile from town, and marked out where the house would stand. He drew plans with Bea's input, ordered lumber to be delivered in early spring, and began setting aside money for furnishings. Through it all, their love deepened. The tentative affection that had grown between them blossomed into something strong and sure. Bea still had moments of sadness, still wrote names in the dirt occasionally, but the overwhelming grief that had marked her when Caleb found her had transformed into a gentle remembrance that could coexist with joy. One snowy evening in early December, as they sat by the fire after Hannah had gone to bed, Bea confessed a fear that had been troubling her. "Sometimes I worry that loving you, being happy with you, somehow diminishes what I felt for those I lost," she said softly. "As if by moving forward I'm leaving them behind." Caleb considered her words carefully. "Do you think your grandmother would want you to remain frozen in grief, or the children you taught in Willow Creek?" "No," Bea admitted. "Elizabeth always said that life was for the living." She'd be the first to tell me to grab happiness with both hands. Then honor her by doing exactly that, Caleb said. Your capacity for love isn't limited, B. Loving me doesn't reduce your love for those you've lost. If anything, it proves how deeply you can love. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. When did you get so wise, Caleb Mitchell? I had a good teacher, he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the world outside transformed by a fresh snowfall that sparkled in the winter sunlight. In the small room at the back of the church where Bea was preparing, Hannah and Mrs. Crawford fussed over every detail. Something borrowed, Mrs. Crawford said, fastening a pearl brooch to Bea's dress, a simple but elegant creation of ivory satin that Hannah had helped her make. These were my mother's, and I expect them back, mind you. Something blue, Hannah added, tucking a blue ribbon into Bea's hair, which was arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck. Something old, Mrs. Crawford continued, handing Bea a lace handkerchief yellowed with age. This belonged to my grandmother. Every bride in my family has carried it for generations. Bea was touched by the gesture, which effectively welcomed her into the older woman's circle of care. Thank you, Mrs. Crawford. I'll take the greatest care with it. And something new, Hannah finished triumphantly, presenting a small package. From Caleb, he asked me to give it to you before the ceremony. Bea unwrapped the package with trembling fingers to reveal a delicate gold locket. Inside was a tiny pencil drawing of the stream where they had sat so many times, where she had written names in the dirt and begun to heal. Oh, she breathed, tears threatening to spill. It's perfect. Hannah fastened it around her neck, careful not to disturb her hair. He commissioned it from Mr. Foster, who does those miniature drawings, had it sent all the way to Denver to be set in the locket. The church bells began to ring, signaling that it was time. Mrs. Crawford checked Bea's appearance one last time, straightening the simple veil that fell from a coronet of winter greenery. You look beautiful, my dear, she said with unexpected warmth. Pine Ridge is fortunate to have found you, and so is Caleb Mitchell. Hannah slipped out to take her place in the church, and Mrs. Crawford followed, leaving Bea alone for a moment. She touched the locket at her throat, thinking of all that had brought her to this day, the grief, the wandering, the chance encounter by Eagle Creek. She thought of the names she had written in the dirt that day, the beloved dead who would always be part of her. I'm happy, she whispered, as if they could hear her. I think you'd be glad for that. Pastor Emerson appeared at the door. It's time, Miss Morgan. Are you ready? Bea took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, I'm ready. The small church was filled to capacity. Every family in Pine Ridge had turned out for the wedding, along with ranchers from miles around. Caleb stood at the altar, looking more nervous than Bea had ever seen him, but when their eyes met as she began her walk down the aisle, his face transformed with a joy so pure it took her breath away. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and steady despite the emotion of the moment. When Pastor Emerson pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause and cheers that spoke of the community's genuine affection for them both. The reception in the town hall afterward was a true celebration, with music from local fiddle players, dancing, and enough food to feed twice the number present. Children from Bea's school presented a special song they had prepared in secret with Hannah's help, and Mr. Crawford offered a toast that brought tears to many eyes. To Caleb and Beatrice Mitchell, he said, raising his glass. May your love be as enduring as the mountains and as sustaining as the streams that water our valley, and may Pine Ridge always be blessed by your presence among us. Later, as they drove back to the ranch in Caleb's wagon, wrapped in blankets against the winter cold, Bea leaned against her new husband's shoulder. Happy, he asked, his arm secure around her. More than I ever thought possible again, she replied honestly. It feels like a miracle, Caleb. All of it finding you, this place, a new purpose. Not a miracle, he disagreed gently. Just life with all its unexpected turns. Some lead to sorrow, some to joy. We've both known plenty of the former. I reckon we're due some of the latter. She smiled, content in the wisdom of his words and in the promise of their shared future. Spring arrived with its usual burst of new life. The snow melted, revealing tender green shoots beneath. The cattle on Caleb's ranch produced healthy calves. The apple orchard bloomed with fragrant white blossoms, and construction began on their new home near town. Bea continued teaching, her dedication earning her the permanent appointment as Pine Ridge's schoolteacher, regardless of her married status, a progressive decision that Mrs. Crawford championed vigorously against some of the more traditional elements on the school board. By early summer, their new home was taking shape, a modest but comfortable dwelling with a large kitchen at Hannah's insistence. A parlor with built-in bookshelves for Bea's growing collection, and 3 bedrooms, one for them, one for Hannah, and one for the future, as Caleb put it with a meaningful glance at his wife. On a warm June evening, almost exactly a year after Caleb had found Bea writing names in the dirt by Eagle Creek, they returned to that spot together. The stream gurgled peacefully, wildflowers dotted the banks, and birds called to each other in the trees overhead. Bea knelt by the water's edge, her fingers finding the soft mud of the bank. With deliberate care, she began to write. Elizabeth, Thomas, Sarah, William. One by one, the names appeared, all 17 of them, the beloved dead of Willow Creek. When she finished, she sat back on her heels, contemplating the names. Caleb knelt beside her, his hand warm on her shoulder. I wanted them to be part of today, she explained. It felt important. Of course, he said, understanding immediately. They're part of who you are, part of what brought you to me. Bea reached into the pocket of her dress and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. She unfolded it carefully to reveal a tiny pair of knitted booties. Hannah helped me make these, she said, her voice soft with wonder. I wasn't sure until the doctor confirmed it yesterday. Caleb stared at the booties, then at his wife's face, comprehension dawning slowly. Bea, are you saying? She nodded, her smile radiant. Yes, we're going to have a baby, Caleb, in January. With a whoop of joy that startled birds from the nearby trees, Caleb swept her into his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy with laughter and love. When he finally set her down, he kissed her with all the emotion he couldn't put into words. A baby, he repeated in awe when they broke apart. Our baby, our future, Bea agreed, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. She looked down at the names written in the dirt, soon to be washed away by the flowing water. Life goes on, doesn't it? Even when we think it can't possibly continue after such loss. It does, Caleb affirmed, drawing her close again. That's its nature, and thank God for it. They stayed by the stream until sunset, talking of the future, of the new life growing within Bea, of the home awaiting completion, of all the possibilities stretching before them. And when they finally rose to leave, Bea looked once more at the names in the dirt, already beginning to blur as the water lapped at the edges. Goodbye, she whispered, not in final farewell but in loving acknowledgement. They would always be part of her story, these names she had once written in despair. But now they were joined by new names: Caleb, Hannah, Pine Ridge, and soon the name of their child. As they walked home hand in hand through the gathering dusk, Bea felt a sense of completion, of having traveled a circle that had brought her not back to where she began, but to where she was meant to be. From names written in grief to names written in remembrance to a new name waiting to be chosen in joy, this was her journey, unexpected and precious beyond measure. And it had all begun when a cowboy found her writing names in the dirt and stopped to ask if she was all right. A simple act of kindness that had changed everything. I love you, Caleb Mitchell, she said as they crested the hill and their ranch came into view, warm light spilling from the windows into the twilight. And I love you, Beatrice Mitchell, he replied, the words familiar now but no less powerful for their repetition. Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come. Together they walked toward home, toward the future they would build together, a future born from sorrow but sustained by love, as enduring as the mountains and as life-giving as the streams that watered their valley. The names in the dirt would wash away with the flowing water, but the love and memories they represented would remain, woven into the fabric of a life reclaimed and renewed, forever part of the woman who had once been lost but was now finally and completely found.